everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kate, and I'm a librarian at the Saratoga Springs Public Library. I'm so excited that we're hosting author Karen Devanis and Dr. Frank Salamone today to talk about a topic that I think is really important to parents, and that's talking to your child's doctor. So thank you both for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate the work you did, Kate, to get this scheduled, and appreciate the library for hosting it. So I'll kind of get the ball rolling. I'll tell you a little bit about my story and what you can expect for this hour, and then I'll hand it over to Dr. Salamone, who I've called Frank in my story. So he says that that's okay for us to call him Frank. So in 1994, my older son, Matthew, developed a weird eye rolling tic. And over the next 2 years, those tics morphed to a number of other tics and odd behaviors and out of character behaviors, as well as physical, emotional, and cognitive decline. Through those 2 years, our pediatrician, who we had a great relationship with, she had known my son since he was born. She just didn't think anything was really wrong. She thought everything fell within the normal range of, child development. And according to some textbooks, that was true. But there was still a part of me that just felt that something wasn't right. So my husband, shortly before Matthew developed his first eye rolling tic, was diagnosed suddenly with type 1 diabetes, which is the insulin-dependent diabetes. So he was busy literally staying alive, and I was very glad that he devoted his energy to that. But as a consequence, he was paying less attention to what was going on with Matt. And, I think it just comes down to maybe mother's intuition, but I just felt that something was wrong, and my husband did not. So what complicated things is that my whole life had been a people pleaser, very uncomfortable with conflict, and I just lacked the skills to push back. So when the pediatrician and my husband and other adults in Matthew's life just didn't see the problem, I didn't know how to push back. I just lacked the skills to do that. So after a couple years, we got to the point, and Matthew was deteriorating so badly that I was exasperated with this child who had been so bright and so energetic, and he just couldn't do the things that he did 6 months before, or 2 months before, or yesterday. And I was mad all the time, and I just decided this is not the mom I want to be. So Matthew and I went to see Frank, and that's when we started the relationship with him. And so I just want to make sure I'm covering all my notes here. The thing is that Frank believed me when the pediatrician did not believe me, when she was not listening. Frank believed me, and he listened. So he also pushed me in a way that I needed, and encouraged me to push back against the system and get tests and referrals and whatever was needed to get a diagnosis for Matthew. And the diagnosis was brain tumor. So that's when Matthew was 11. He's now 38 and doing quite well. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because from here on out, it's his story. But I ultimately ended up writing a book about our experience. It's called Growth, A Mother, Her Son, and the Brain Tumor They Survived. It came out last year. And it's really about this kind of overlap of medical gaslighting, which is when a practitioner is dismissing your concerns or acting like, you made them up. Kind of the collision of that with my people pleasing, and how it failed my son for a period of time when he was really, deteriorating dangerously. So it is available in Amazon and your local bookstore and libraries. That's the last plug I'll make for my book. But in the process, when the book was getting ready to come out, I really wanted to track down Dr. Salamone and let him know that he, really, I felt, made a difference in our story, and that I was so grateful for it. So we got reconnected through Facebook. And so the purpose behind this discussion is, I've had this burning question for 25 years. Why did you believe me when other doctors did not? And yes, I want to say right up front, I'm a white middle-class woman. People like me, who look like me, are more often believed in the medical care system than someone of color or someone struggling with low income or, addictions or whatever. So that's part of it. And yet I was the same person for the pediatrician and the other doctor. So somehow, this I just wanted to know what kind of Frank's thinking about this, or what went into the dynamics of that relationship. But I thought this discussion was important because I think other parents can learn from my experience. That's really why I wrote my book. And I think other parents can benefit from this discussion. And, we're going to talk about it kind of in our relationship, but then broaden it out to what's kind of general patient practitioner dynamics and how parents can really communicate in the best way possible. So we'll have a little discussion. If you have questions, feel free to use the chat. As Kate said, if you want to wait until the recording stops and ask a question, that's fine. I also have some handouts that will be available to you. Kate will provide a link to a Google Drive with some handouts, but I do want to just go over them quickly. I'll share my screen to make a couple points about that. And at any time on my, the handouts have my website. I have a contact page there. So if anyone would prefer to ask me questions, I'm pretty open about this whole process. I kind of spilled my guts in my book. So I'm happy for people to reach out on my contact page and I can get back to you. So now with that being said, I guess, Frank, so, again, my burning question is, what was it that, made you believe me, made you see that, I wasn't making things up or exaggerating things? What are the things that go into that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And as I've been thinking about it, my answer has changed a few times, coming up even to, new things have occurred to me since you've been talking tonight, and so because it was a long time ago, I was going to ask you the year. All right.
Yeah,
By the way,
yeah,
and I'm not trying to plug anyone's book here, but it was, I got a copy of the book and I read it, I think I rarely do this, but I think I might have read it all on that Saturday that I saw you, and so it's a really, it reads like fiction almost, like it's almost meant to engage you, and I was just turning the pages and going right through it. I was also, it was a process where I was also trying to remember for myself, like the order of the things that happened. Right. And honestly, you disguise names cleverly in the book. And so I was also trying to remember who was who.
Right.
I was pretty sure who I was.
Right. Well,
I wasn't quite sure. Yeah.
Well, I'll just say, first of all, thank you, Frank, for the compliments on my book. And for those who have read the book, so Frank is Adam in the book. I changed all the doctors' names because my purpose wasn't to, blame anyone, drag them through the mud. So I did, but Frank was Adam. Yeah.
And so, so I'm going back. So part of what I'm going to start to answer your question. I think this may be evolved into different ways, I'm going to start to answer your question to remember the time frame. Okay. That I was, a pretty newly minted psychologist at the time. I had been practicing for about maybe 4 or 5 years, which may not seem new to somebody that's been practicing 4 or 5 years, but now in the retrospect of a 35-year career, like, does seem like the beginning. And so the setting was a staff model HMO. Okay, a staff model, and so it's a little bit hard if people don't remember the organization. It's a little bit hard to remember what that type of organization was like. And so we have, in this area, we have CDPHP and MVP, and the doctors are all independent practitioners, essentially. And in this setting, the doctors were employed by the health plan, and so frequently worked together. And so I was physically situated for part of the week in a pediatrics department in Latham, and I would work with pediatricians often, and I became I noticed, let's put it that way, that pediatricians did a lot of reassurance. Okay, that it was, if you would hear pediatricians talking, it was kind of the way they would talk amongst themselves was that this parent is alarmed over something. There's not anything to be alarmed about. And in my role, I would frequently hear stories of reassurance gone wrong. Because I would be seeing an 11-year-old who maybe had a speech delay, and they were told by the pediatrician that, it'll pass, it's developmental, and it turned out to be, say, autism or something like that, or ADHD, and there was a long time in accepting the diagnosis of ADHD or validating the diagnosis of ADHD, and the parent felt as if they had lost time. And so I began to see, I understood the pediatrician's perspective because I had like kind of a self-selected population. The fact that they were seeing me kind of meant that the reassurance had worked, in a sense, because it was kind of going to the next level.
Right.
But I kind of developed a sensitivity as a reassurance as kind of a risky intervention. And I would differentiate between reassurance with data and reassurance without data. And so say somebody, you complain about a pain in your leg, and somebody does a study, an MRI or something, and then there's data and evidence, and the doctor says, well, this is really nothing. I don't see anything here. Okay, that's reassurance with data. Reassurance without data is not doing a test, not looking into it, and just saying, because this is such a common complaint, we don't need to do anything further. We just need to attribute it to one of the many causes it could be outside of something serious. And I began to be cautious about that. It was one of the things that became, over my career, I made these decisions about things. There are others that, my students call them Frankisms. Okay. That are like kind of like things born of experience that I made, one of my decisions was that reassurance is dangerous. Okay. That make sure you have reason to reassure before you tell parents, oh, that's okay. And
I just
Yeah,
wanted to,
yeah.
excuse me for a minute. So I just want to reemphasize that because I think that, even though my two sons are grown now, but just as a kind of to make a note to myself, just to understand it about, pediatricians doing that type of reassurance, because of course, pediatricians are dealing with usually newer parents as opposed to,
100%.
someone with more experienced parenting skills, but, new parents who are very, I mean, little babies can be scary, the things they do. You don't know what's normal and what's not. And just to mention too, in my book, I use the phrase, and medical doctors are taught this in medical school. If you hear hoofbeats, look for horses, not zebras. And so, in
Yes.
other words, exactly what you're saying, Frank, that they're kind of trained to look for, okay, what are the things that happen most often? Because perhaps statistically, if a child, there's some type of unusual behavior or concern, perhaps statistically, it's usually not something serious. But then when there is a zebra and they have the blinders on, the doctors have the blinders on, that's when there's a problem.
Thank you for contextualizing that, very nicely, Karen. Because I don't want what I said, I love the pediatricians that I worked with. They're some of the most lovely people that I have still ever met in my life. It's kind of different doctors have different kinds of personalities as a group. And pediatricians, often were some of the most warm, doctors you could find in many ways. And they have the unique thing of parents not knowing what's normal. And to your point, they have that kind of unique position that these are new parents that don't know that a child with a croupy cough is just something that happens.
Right.
In childhood, and first time you hear it, it's like, oh my God, there must be something horribly wrong, or whatever,
Yeah.
And so there's that. There's the reassurance aspect. Then there's there are other things that I think come into it if I'm going to be actually very, very personal about this, and that and I think I might have shared some of this, Karen, when we were talking separately. I took my job extremely seriously when I was, and I still do. I don't work with as many children as I once did, but I used to work with mostly children, and I felt as if the decisions you make are really, really important in terms of people's lives, and there was a heightened importance for me for some reason. It may have something to do with sensitivity. That I think entered into. I shared with Karen that I can remember we would see new patients a lot at this organization. And I can remember running across, as a young psychologist, things I had never seen. Selective mutism comes to mind. And there was no internet back then. And, and I can remember having there were several go-to psychology book catalogs that the publishers of psychology texts for clinicians. And I can remember going through the W.W. Norton or Guilford catalog and calling up on the phone and ordering a book, hoping that the book would arrive before I saw the patient again. So I would be up to date about, because you can't know everything, and there's, at least back then, there wasn't a specialist available for everything.
Right.
And so I remember that heightened importance, that sense of responsibility. I would feel when people, and I still feel, honestly, when people consult me. I've come across many, a psychologist, a therapist can deal with life or death situations in terms of suicidality. And I walk the line as a professional today. I don't want my patients to become overly dependent on me, but I want to be there for them when needed, and that's a line. You can do damage if you're too available and you get too involved.
Yeah.
But that was always there for me, that this is the most important kid in the room, in the world, for this hour.
Yeah.
Honestly. That's, I don't know where that's from. I suspect it's from my own parents, to be honest with you, but it's like, that was always the way I approach things. And there's reasons why clinicians don't act that way, because when bad stuff happens, it's very hard. Mm-hmm. When you care that much. Right. And so I think that in some ways there's a protective aspect that people don't. So I've outlined a couple general reasons, mm-hmm. that not why I believe Karen, but why I believe most parents came mm-hmm. into my office, or at least I gave them the benefit of the doubt that this may be something that we need to check and make sure. Just mm-hmm. like if I'm not comfortable with somebody leaving my office who's suicidal, mm-hmm. I would want to some kind of plan to make sure.
Right.
Who are you living with? What do they know about the situation? Can you go to them for, just a safety plan?
Yeah.
So those are two general reasons that actually have just come up to me since this began, and maybe a little bit before, when I was anticipating going on. So I want to come up for air a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. So I have a couple things, kind of a follow-up. So, because I was thinking about this too, that one difference, let's say, between, your practice and our pediatrician's practice was that, first of all, Matthew was diagnosed in 1997. So we're talking, like you said, pre-internet days. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember actually how long appointments were, but when you think about today, a lot of doctors, like the physical, doctors, medical doctors, have 10 or 15 minutes with the patient, where you probably typically have 45 to 50. So I think right there, I would hope that a psychologist or a therapist would have a better understanding of, have a better picture of what's going on, because they spend more time. And also, I think for a while we were seeing you every 2 weeks, as opposed to, the pediatrician is once a year, unless, things go wrong, the croup comes up or something like that.
Yeah,
so, right. And also, probably just the nature of your field and how you're trained. I mean, you're trained to listen and reflect back and that type of thing, where doctors, I don't know, I don't know how much training they have for those intercommunication skills. They're probably more so today than they were back then.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that, of course they do psychiatry rotations,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember that I think there was, and this has just been my own, experience, the whole primary care problem. I mean, myself, I've had trouble. My doctor retired, and I had trouble replacing him.
Mm-hmm.
There's just such a shortage of primary care doctors, which is another whole discussion. But
Right.
And most primary care doctors will have kind of regrets about not being able to spend more time
Mm-hmm.
with individual patients because of exactly the demands. There's so many. The practices are closed. They take in more patients because this doctor has referred somebody that they have a relationship with, and so their practice grows and grows. And it's really the type of thing where the system's overburdened to a sense.
Very much. Yeah,
yeah.
very much. I think so.
And so, and that's, again, a whole nother discussion, but there was another, in answering the question that you're asking, there's another aspect, which I think is almost like common sense, but it's born of my experience and it's a legitimate way to honestly answer the question, which is that, there have been parents I've met in my career that this is kind of a trend where there are a series of complaints that one would not strike you as indicative of something that you may not take seriously, but 6 and 6 consecutive weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't the feeling I was getting from you. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't, there was almost a sense, there's this strange sense when you get parents who truly do have, and I don't want to call it, there's the term that's thrown around very popularly, Munchausen's, whatever. It's complicated to what that even means, but I would say obsessive worry.
Mm-hmm.
That just manifests itself, just like I myself have kind of hypochondriac tendencies, and so like, something, I'll have a headache and I'll think, what is this? Or, something gastrointestinal going on, and so, and I think there are parents that have that quality applied to their children.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that it's like, I don't see it as anything sinister in most cases. It's not like, it's intentional deception.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like I have this worry, and then this is replaced by that worry, and this is replaced by the other thing that may be wrong with my child.
Right.
And after you've been through a few of those, one of the things is that it takes on a very characteristic form. It doesn't respond very well to reassurance. Because that's not the way obsessive, like when you try to reassure yourself, right, through obsessive, it doesn't, one trip to the internet to reassure yourself doesn't satiate it.
Right.
It
right.
just creates the loop to create the next cycle of worry.
Yeah. So I just want to clarify. So
sure.
Are you saying that parents who come in, like, let's say every 2 weeks, they have a different concern or a different angle on it or whatever, that that's almost like a pattern that you're able to identify?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
okay. Okay.
Yeah. It's a pattern, and it would be maybe consecutive worries.
Mm-hmm.
First it's this, then it's that, then it's the third thing, rather
Mm-hmm.
than one recurring worry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Where you begin to say, well, gee whiz, either there's something very diffuse going on with this kid medically,
Mm-hmm.
or this is a worried parent.
Right. Right.
Okay. Who, by the way, needs to be dealt with artfully rather than, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
rather than just told, stop it. That, again, it requires the relationship and compassion necessary to start believing you that these are just worries
Mm-hmm.
that are occurring in the person's head, and don't. And now I'm not a physician, but I'd want to work in collaboration with a physician that was, again, getting some data, getting,
Right. Right.
maybe a referral to a specialist.
Mm-hmm.
It, it's a, I mean, I'm sure there's stuff written about that whole cycle and what to
Right.
do with that as a primary
Right.
care, provider.
Right.
Because the reality is that, we don't have an unlimited amount of medical dollars in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And those types of things get expensive.
Right.
And I'm from the old HMO frame of mind. If I'm doing something unnecessary, then somebody else may be not getting something that is necessary.
Right. And I think for us that, the HMO model was part of, I think what prolonged this whole, misdiagnosis period for Matt, because,
That's a very good point.
at least as I recall, or at least at the time, I had the sense that there was only one pediatrician
Yes.
in that practice. And so it's not like we could go elsewhere without going outside of the, the provider network.
Yeah.
And
or at least
probably,
it was pretty onerous, to get to that point. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, I probably could have, but I did not, neither my husband and I did that.
Yeah. Inside baseball here, it's like that really killed the staff model HMO.
Mm-hmm.
That need for choice. And then that particular organization started like a hybrid model shortly thereafter,
Mm-hmm.
where you could either see an independent contractor or somebody that was employed by the end, which was not viable financially, and they ended up leaving the area.
Right.
And so yeah.
Yeah, there was one other thing, and I thought I had my notes right here, but I don't have them. When you and I talked a while ago, you used a couple of phrases, and it had to do with kind of getting a snapshot of what was going on versus like a longer term view. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I think that I think that I could have. I don't remember exactly the context I said that to you in, but I think what I might have been referring to is that kind of what you were talking about before, is that when you develop a relationship with a family, which you do over the series of meetings, 20 meetings, 2 weeks apart, you get I think the way I might have used it is the 2 week meetings are snapshots that you can put in series against each other.
Yeah.
And that gives you an overall view, okay, of what's going on. And so just really briefly, by way of example, a therapist gets a very good view of how people are doing the last 3 months as opposed to the 3 months prior. Okay, because you're getting these snapshots that are telling.
Yeah.
You know, everything from the person's affect to the you know, to what they're talking about, to, and so it's not uncommon for me to say to somebody, when people get depressed, they think they've always been depressed, you know, and so it's not uncommon to be say, you know, you've been doing really well until these past few months where this stumble came.
Yeah.
You know, and so how that applies to your situation is that I was seeing deterioration. And it's incredible, I think, because of what ended up happening, how well I remember this whole, I remember sequences of dialogue.
I know, that's so interesting.
You know, I think it's because it was so, when it ends this way, and it had a happy ending, but like, to my knowledge, it was, I mean, we kind of lost touch after a lot of the surgeries and things, you know, and so to my, I'm sorry to keep on doing that. My camera centers itself. I remember, I can't remember if it was you or your husband that said, he can't hit a baseball anymore. That was like a real signal to me.
Yeah.
Like, kids' sports, at that age, kids' sports performance improves. You know, it's just like, you know, the nervous system is myelinating. There's like rapid growth in abilities. And for someone to decline year over year in something like hitting a baseball, that was like a gong for me.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great, again, I want to emphasize that because, and I'm taking some notes here because for a parent, if they're presenting to, you know, a pediatrician or a doctor with concerns about their child, that would be something for the parent to look for. You know, how has a child's development in terms of, even if not organized sports, but like those physical, you know, activities, how has that changed? Because it sounds like that would be helpful. And interestingly, so one of the, I don't know if you remember the scene from my book, but again, I think what happened with our pediatrician was, you know, she got to a point where she just, I think, made up her mind that I was overreacting, and I'll just, and that I was overreacting, and then, you know, you mentioned Munchausen syndrome by proxy, and I'll just mention that she was suspecting me of that. It was never, fortunately, a, you know, actual diagnosis. Unfortunately, Frank, that's where he stepped in and he said, no, that's not what's going on. But at one point, Matt was, we went for he was thinking about joining this track league. It must have been after he was out of 5th grade. So he was going to be moving to another school for 6th grade. And, you know, and so much in the book, he just was not aware. It was part of what was going on with the brain tumor. He just was not aware of things. At one point, he kind of had this moment of clarity, and he said, he did a long jump, and he said, Mom, I did twice that distance, you know, last year. And so I tried to get the records from the school because I thought I could bring that to the pediatrician and say, look, this is what's going on. And I couldn't get the records, but when I did, tell her about the differences, she, her argument was, oh, well, Matt's put on weight, which he did because he was, physically slowing down. And so he can't jump as far. Like there was just always an excuse. So, so let me ask you, something, and then I want to also just read a little part of my book and get your reaction to it.
Sure.
So in terms of, oh dear, I lost my train of thought. Well, let me just jump to. So there's just a little, like a paragraph in my book that I want to read and kind of get your reactions to it. So so what happened, just for the other participants, just to kind of give this some context. So, we had been seeing Frank from January 1997 until, well, Matthew was diagnosed in September, so pretty much that whole time. But there was one point, let's say around the summer, where I was still caught up in my own self-doubt and not pushing through, I wasn't listening to my gut. And so as I recall, and so again, in this is memoir, so I wrote things to the best of my ability according to what my memories are, and it doesn't mean that they were 100% accurate, but I think I was kind of waffling, and I sensed that, Frank, that you got to the point that you felt like someone's got to push this woman to start speaking up, So you said something like, I'll go to bat for you, Karen. I've given Dr. Peterson, who is the pediatrician, the name I gave her in the book, I'll give her my assessment, but I can't do it alone. You're Matthew's mom. You're going to have to fight for answers. For a therapist to give advice is unusual. Therapy is meant to empower clients to make their own decisions as part of the personal growth process. A therapist who gives advice risks robbing his client of crucial insight and learning. When a client's safety is at risk, a therapist may try to help her arrive at a safe course of action. If the client's denial is immutable and their blinders occlusive, however, a therapist may have no choice but to advise. Call a domestic abuse hotline and don't go home. Or your risk-taking is endangering your life. Or in my case, you have to fight for your child. So, and again, I don't expect you to remember, things the way I remember them, but have you ever with a patient felt like they really did need that push, like they were maybe stuck in whatever, for me, it was the people pleasing and the fear of conflict. Did you ever feel that a patient was really stuck in a place where they had to be pushed beyond that?
Yeah, I think you characterized it nicely in that paragraph, that it's kind of like, for me, it's kind of like plan A, plan B, plan C. The first choice would be for the person to just arrive at the conclusion. There's a metaphor of a therapist as midwife, like just let things come out rather than just make sure nothing goes wrong in the process, but let things come out and just kind of, for lack of a better term, supervise the procedure, and that's optimal. The second is more of a and by the way, some of the time with that, I haven't made a decision on which way it needs to go. I'm just like merely like following the patient's lead, and the second is something short of that, where you're kind of almost like Socratic questioning to try to lead to an answer, to try to kind of a guided discovery like
Mhm.
like an English teacher might
Right.
in high school, you know. And the third is um, this feels like malpractice if you don't say something out loud.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like at that point, I suspect, and I don't remember this part, I don't remember. I suspect I was reasonably sure that there was something wrong at some point,
Mhm.
at that
Mhm.
point, you know, that there was something that,
Yeah.
in specifically that there was a braid to him. And I'm not
Mhm.
going to, like, I'm not medically clairvoyant. Just the pattern of deterioration,
Mhm.
you know, was, and I had enough exposure to Matthew
Right.
to see that. I suspect at that moment I was feeling like, uh, this isn't, we got to get, you know, to the right party.
Mhm.
And the HMO, and I had been working in that organization for a while, and so I
Mhm.
knew how that could kind of be um, you know, a labyrinth
Yeah.
of you know, kind of to get out, you know.
Mhm.
And there's another aspect that I want to mention about the HMO aspect. There was a beauty in all the doctors working together, and there was also a danger in
Mhm.
it. The beauty was you could collaborate and communicate and be on the same page and sending the same message to patients.
Yeah.
And I think you'll probably guess what the other side is that you're kind of, it's like groupthink, you
Yeah.
know, where because your colleague is so sure
Mhm.
that now the neurologist, everybody who works on the same team are all kind of like falling in line under the same narrative
Yeah, that's
where,
interesting.
yeah, where there may be tacit disagreements that could have been a weakness of that model.
Yeah. Yeah.
And believe me, I don't want to, there were strengths, you know, there were
Yeah.
definite strengths. I remember just as an example of a strength, I just feel a certain amount of loyalty to my first job just to say this, you know, I remember, I would talk to this one family practice doctor who's very into the whole idea of family therapy. And I mean, he might have done some externship in family therapy or something. And I would talk to him about what message I was sending to the child, like
Mhm.
say a 10-year-old boy. And and the boy would say, I'd say to him that message, and the boy would say, you know, Dr. Kennedy said the same thing, you know. And so it was not like twice, it was more like 10 times the
Mhm.
effect, because it's like everybody agrees this is what I should do,
Right. Right.
you know, which that's the positive to that aspect
Yeah.
of that
Yeah.
kind of collaboration. There's also a hidden risk,
Mhm.
if you will, of this type of thing where everybody's come to the conclusion that the first person came to.
Right. Well, and let me just say, because
Yeah,
you're clear that you want to present, the pluses and
yeah,
minuses of the HMO and that
yeah,
particular practice.
yeah,
And I really feel that way about um, the doctors in my story specifically. There are no villains in that
yeah,
story. I mean,
yeah.
even the pediatrician and people who've read the story know kind of how complicated things got. But you know, um
I
there's
appreciate
no
that.
villains,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
It's
appreciate that,
just,
because a polarized account is going to obscure a lot.
yeah, yeah,
You know, a really polarized account of like, here, you know, life isn't that simple.
hmm, yeah,
You know, it's not Star Wars.
right, exactly, exactly. You know what, Frank, I just
Yeah,
paid attention, just looked at the time, and I did want to
yeah,
spend a couple minutes going over these handouts, but
sure. Please.
but there's a couple things specifically that I want to get your thoughts on. So let's see. I think it's set up that I can share. Let me see. Share my desktop. Okay, so just open kind of one thing at a time here. Actually, I'll make this a little bit smaller. How do I make this smaller? So again, participants you'll get a link to these handouts. But I wanted to put some thoughts down in this one that we're looking at right now. And I broke it down to things that you can do before, during, and after an appointment. And this is kind of focused on how to talk to your child's doctor about unusual concerns. So I would say this is not your run-of-the-mill appointment like the annual well child visit, with the doctor. But if you really have some unusual concerns and you want to bring them to the attention of the doctor, I won't go through all the bullet points, but I do want to say the first one is, give yourself permission to speak up. And I think parents know this, that they need to advocate for their child. But there are people like me who need to be reminded and need to be told. And there are still, I've worked since my book has come out, and this whole process, even before the book was out, but kind of confronting my people pleasing and working on not being that way anymore. It is still scary for me to think about, for example, speaking up to a doctor. So one of the things I say, if that makes you uncomfortable, then you know that you have some work to do. So practice in the mirror, role play with a friend, picture yourself speaking up in a firm but polite way. And if you really are resistant to that, then, know that you might have some work to do, and it's worth, paying attention to that before you're in a situation like me where it was, nearly too late. And then, so keep track of what's going on with your child. Like Frank had suggested, paying attention to their athletic abilities is a good, kind of marker for things. But then when you come to the doctor, choose the top 3 problems that you want to focus on, because one thing that you want to avoid is just, if you have so many things, it's going to be hard for the doctor to focus. And later on and I think in the next section about during the appointment, if you find that you have more questions and they're not being asked, just be really upfront about it. Hey, doc, I have some more questions that I think are really important. How can I go about, having some more conversations? They might want you to have another appointment. They might have a PA that you can talk to, or a nurse, at least to get started. So, let's see. Okay, so a lot of this is, pretty self-evident. But I did, when I was putting this together, I said something at first about dress for the role. And I took that out because I was running out of room. But I do think that parents are in a role, in the relationship with the provider. So they want to make sure that, I suggest dress for a good first impression, and to rebalance the power differential. So this doctor's there in a white coat, you don't want to come, you're welcome to come in your sweats, but there are definitely those optics that come into play. So you want to, just like you're applying for a job. And you know what? It's a shame that parents have to feel like they got to step into a role in order to, have a conversation with the doctor. But it's reality. When you go to a job, you dress a certain way. When you meet someone for the first time, I think people are aware of that first impression, how valuable that is. So it's just, it's a matter of kind of putting yourself in the best position. And so my very bottom point, you may not be able to see it here, but I say to, it's not cooperating now. Okay, here we go. Consider engaging a therapist or a psychologist. They are trained to listen and can be your ally. I was always very open to the therapeutic relationship. I realize for a lot of people that doesn't feel comfortable, but Frank, I just wanted to get your thoughts because I do think that again, we talked about the nature of the work that you do. You're trained to listen, you spend more time with patients, you see them more frequently. I think it's valuable, for parents, like if they really are not feeling heard, and if they feel that the child can benefit or themselves can benefit, but to get into a relationship with a therapist or a psychologist because that could be your ally there.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, I agree. I just say that I'm thinking that the therapy is still something that society is willing to pay for. Insurance is willing to pay for that.
Yeah.
That is a slower process in terms of getting to know, doing a more in-depth look at certain problems people have and problem solving. That can't be done in your thing about advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
I think ties into being assertive. And this is like for anyone who's listening to this. I know enough from being around. I'm a psychologist, not a physician. I've been by happenstance around a lot of physicians in my career, and physicians are some of the most strongest advocates for themselves or their families.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting.
When they are in a bind with a family member or themselves, mm-hmm. because they know what can slip through the cracks.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that repeatedly. That don't assume that the hospital did this.
Yeah.
Because again, they have a knowledge of the imperfections of the systems that they work within. Mm-hmm. And if anything, my experience of being around physicians has told me that your instincts are right to question. And this is the most negative thing I will say about some doctors. Some doctors don't make it easy by a condescending attitude.
Right.
Like how dare you, kind of, no, there's, and give you a answer that's, by the way, completely wrong that can be checked with an internet search in 30 mm-hmm. seconds. Mm-hmm. I'm not, and a really simple fact.
Yeah.
And so that's it's something that I see doctors themselves doing mm-hmm. tirelessly.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you mentioned that because on this next handout that's available, I have at the bottom, I have some links to some articles, but there are a couple YouTubes put together by, I think he's a radiologist or maybe he's an anesthesiologist. Great YouTubes. I highly recommend these. One is nice patients come out last. And it's something apparently doctors talk about. And the other one is about medical gaslighting. And it's just like you were saying, Frank, some doctors, like everyone else, and, they're people with better skills and less good skills, but they have that condescension that makes it difficult. So I just want to finish up. So this handout just has some good links for you and in terms of credible sources for Google. And this little handout here, the Sammy Sunshine, was put together by an author I know, Debbie Lewis, who wrote Kitchen Medicine, How I Fed My Daughter Out of Failure to Thrive. And it's a great graphic. She puts this together and gives this to doctors. So they have everything, you know, like the highlights in an easy to read, kind of user-friendly format. I highly recommend that people think about doing something like that. So it's just really, really clear. And then the last handout is one from the CDC that has a lot of good basic information. So again, the library will provide. Let me get back. Let's see. Let me stop sharing. And how do I stop sharing? Oh, let's see. Here we go. Stop share. Where'd you go? Okay. What was I going to say? Again, there'll be a link to these that the library will provide to the handout. So, boy, I'm sorry to speed things up at the end here, but we are at 8 o'clock. So I want to thank Dr. Frank Salamone. You know, thank you so much. I feel like you saved our family, but thank you so much for this time tonight. I really appreciate all that you had to offer. And again, Kate, thanks to you in the library. This was a great opportunity. And I guess that's it. Were you going to stop the recording and see if people had questions?
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really great. Yeah, I'm going to stop it now. Thank you.